What's going on, y'all? I'm KM Best. Marvel Snap's newest OTA changes are looking to shake up the metagame. Let's get into it. The most important of these changes is Dr. Doom going from adding 5-power DoomBots to 4-power DoomBots. This is a pretty significant change to one of the most dominant 6-cost cards we have ever had. Dr. Doom has been a default inclusion in list after list after list. He's been basically the best Series 3 card to pick up, period, and tuning down Doom list is a pretty good thing to do. When you think about the lists that dominate the metagame right now, High Evolutionary Lockjaw, High Evolutionary Lockdown, even things like Electro Ramp or High Evolutionary Midrange, they're all playing Doom, and that is usually a sign that this card might be a little bit too good, so he's going from a total of 15 power to now 13 with the -1 on each of his DoomBots. And I think those decks, I wouldn't be surprised to see them keep the Doom around. He's still such a unique effect for what he's trying to do, for what he's trying to accomplish. His synergy with Odin is still very viable, but losing a little bit of power there, I think they can afford to do that. And I think if they can afford to take the nerf and that is just going to be fine for them, then it means it's a pretty good nerf for them to take. As far as the metagame itself, I'm not entirely sure how much this opens up. I personally believe that the Lockjaw Evo decks with Doom, the Electro decks with Doom, and the Lockdown decks with Doom to a significantly lesser extent are still going to be elite, and you're still going to have good results when you play them. So I wouldn't panic too much, Doom lovers. I think this is just a fine little tuning down, and hopefully it matters enough that we see some more variety there, but mostly, I don't think that we will. Red Skull is getting buffed, and Red Skull used to have this exact stat line and effect, and was nerfed progressively out of having this stat line and effect. Now, we're moving back to it. He's a much more interesting card as a 14-power guy that buffs your opponents by 2. He's a really interesting unit to have around. Now, maybe we can get some Shuri back in the metagame. I do think Shuri's main worry is, something like Spider-Man or things like that. The fact that we can no longer Cosmo our Shuri lanes is definitely bad in the face of Shang-Chi, who is extremely common. So I don't necessarily expect this deck to rush back in force, but I'm hoping people can play around in the space. I'm hoping, maybe it ends up being an interesting thing to try out, going over the top of some of these decks. I don't know how far over the top you're actually going to go, but if you can get really, really over the top, Red Skull lanes are genuinely hard to beat, especially a Taskmastered Red Skull lane with like 28 power and no bonus to your opponent. There's some interesting stuff you can do here as long as you're curving out early as well. So definitely an archetype to keep an eye on. I just think it's no longer ever going to be the Titan that it used to be, even with Red Skull reverted back to this spot, thanks to the nerf to Shuri, preventing you from being able to play Cosmo. I do wonder about perhaps a Sauron version of it. The weird thing about this change is that it actually is a bit of a buff to Sauron because the ongoing ability is now so much more detrimental. Making it way less detrimental is genuinely a very good thing to do. I do still think you're going to need to run armor just because protecting your stuff from getting shanged is so important, but we'll see how this goes. I'm interested to see how it goes. Obviously, I enjoyed playing Shuri. I think it's a good thing to have the back in the metagame now that Cosmo is not preventing anyone from interacting with it. So, yeah, I think this is a good change. As far as decks, I think this is the one that makes the most sense to me immediately with the reversion to Red Skull. I like the idea of just putting out a bunch of points and daring our opponent to deal with it while also being reasonably able to play through things like Wave and Sandman. Like, Shuri is 100% able to beat the living shit out of an Electro deck because you just go Shuri into Red Skull into Taskmaster. And that's actually really hard to beat, especially if you're already tempoing early with stuff like Zero into Ebony Maw, an early Sunspot, armors, things like that. Speaking of which, the armor is mandatory here. We also get sort of free roll an Enchantress because we have Typhoid Mary, we have Lizard, we have plenty of stuff that we want to hit with that Enchantress, so she's like the default option here, but I wouldn't necessarily think she's the only thing we can do. Another way we can take this deck is maybe attempting to include Kitty Pryde. I've seen some Kitty Shuri decks, but I wanted to keep it super simple here, but if you were to put Kitty in here, I would definitely put Kitty in over Ebony Maw. I really hate Ebony Maw. I want any excuse to cut him, but a 1/7 is just an extremely powerful card after Sauron, and You also have Zero if you draw him early, and I think that's enough for me to be okay with the existence of Ebony Maw in this deck. Obviously, I hate him, but I will live, I will deal, I will at least try it like this. And another thing that this deck has going for it is that it's actually very, very cheap. The only card that's actually expensive to acquire in here is Sauron. And actually, now that I think about it, I've had him for so long, I'm not even sure if he's in Series 4 anymore. This might be like a genuinely good cheapo deck for people to enjoy. And so I do hope it goes somewhere nice. I hope this ends up being something good. I'm going to be trying it on stream later in the day. So I hope, you know, if you're watching this day of, you'll be able to stop by and see that. Twitch.tv/KMBestMS. Nick Fury going from being a 5-cost 7-power unit to a 4-cost 5-power unit. This is actually pretty nuts. Like, this is a card that saw almost no play. It was famously the worst card to ever come out of a battle pass. Yes, Nick Fury was on a battle pass in the beta. And now it actually sort of has more of a role in some sort of Zabu, Darkhawk, Dino kind of thing that you could be getting going with this, because now putting 3 cards in your hand, extremely powerful with Devil Dinosaur, 4/5, reasonable stat line, goes with Zabu. You also get to run things like the Collector. You get to run a lot of things that generally go well with this. Quinjet can go in that deck, make you play a 5 and a 5 if you don't have the Dino. Just a bunch of things that are really generally pretty good. And Nick Fury also has the additional advantage of introducing an element of randomness into the game of Marvel Snap. And the reason that's useful is because in Conquest, your opponent is going to be playing around what they've seen. Nick Fury generating random 6-drops is generally really hard to deal with. You are not going to be able to play around a Doctor Doom that you don't see in their deck. That's just not a thing that you're going to be able to play around, and the information is asymmetric. You, playing Nick Fury, know that you have these cards. They don't know that you have them. So I think I'm actually pretty excited to see if Nick Fury can revitalize the Dino archetype. I do wonder if it might just be like a victim of the meta, as it were, but that's the kind of thing that I really want to see people playing this version of Nick Fury in, something with Zabu, Devil Dinosaur. That's really where I want to be building around. The Nimrod buff coming in the same patch as the Doctor Doom nerf is truly, truly interesting. So the thing I like thinking about with Nimrod, when he came out, the main pitch was, what are the scenarios in which he is better than a Doctor Doom? And it became very clear very quickly that the answer to that was basically Galactus and really nowhere else. But now, Nimrod being 6s means that something like Nimrod into Venom and Deathlock is actually like a really compelling play to make, because you're sending all of these 6s all around the board, blowing up multiple 6s. It's a lot more points when you think about Nimrod as a card that scales multiplicatively. It doubles, right? You get multiple Nimrods the more you do this. So now I think there might actually be room for some sort of Nimrod Destroyer deck, or even, I know this is a weird one, but like, I don't know if he's going to go big enough, but the fact that he now goes significantly bigger is not nothing. Like, I do think the deck is still going to struggle with some of the common play lines available in the metagame, but being able to have this option is pretty good. I remember when Nimrod first came out, I tried him in a Sarah deck with a lot of those cards in it, like a destroy sub-theme Sarah deck, where the idea was you get a Sarah into, like, you know, Nimrod plus Carnage plus whatever. And like, that is still, now it's like a significantly better play. It's harder to play against. The issue is there's a lot of decks that just go very, 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 very tall, right? And the decks that don't go very, 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 very tall are decks that prevent you from playing multiple cards on the final turn of the game, or go very, very tall. Like, they're doing one or the other, or sometimes both, right? Electro going very, very, very tall. Wave in the Lockjaw Evo deck going very, 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 very tall. It's an interesting metagame to be in if you aren't either going really tall and preventing your opponents from playing cards, or going even taller and losing when they prevent you from playing cards, a la Kitty Bounce, right? So I think that's the fundamental thing that's going on that's really interesting here. And I don't know if Nimrod's going to make a difference now, but there are situations in a different metagame where I would be very into Nimrod in this new form. So, what do you think? Which of these changes do you think is going to be the most impactful? I personally believe that the Doctor Doom change is going to be a big one, but not necessarily one that moves the meta into a completely different form, just one that tones down a lot of the top meta predators. One thing I think a lot of people were surprised not to see is any changes to High Evolutionary, and I think a lot of that is because it's hard to change the cards in the OTA format, which can only change the numbers on cards. I think realistically, the only one I could have expected or wanted is changing it so Wasp only hits 1, but I think in order to do that, you'd actually have to change the text of the card, because right now she says like you actually want to hit 2 random cards. Like it's not just 2 cards, the cards part is plural. And so I think you'd actually have to change the text to do that. Another text change that I'd kind of want to see is make Hulk start at like a flat +2 that increases by +1. I think that's a good way of keeping him a little bit more in line. But these are not changes that the OTA tool can accomplish. The OTA tool can only change the numbers on cards and not the wording on them. And so for that reason, I think it would be pretty difficult to actually address High Evolutionary in an OTA without at the very least introducing some clunky wording, because or just like completely obliterating cards. Like if you change Hulk to go to +1, it's just like completely obliterated. You could do that, right? It would probably make it terrible. So I'm glad that they didn't blow up High Evolutionary, but I would definitely be looking towards the next patch when they can actually change the wording of these cards in order to see what you're going to do with High Evo. As far as the rest of the patch, I really enjoyed it. I am a dinosaur lover. I really hope Dino ends up doing something real. I do worry that just the downward pressure on the metagame that the bounce decks create is something that a Dino deck just really can't deal with, but I have a little bit of hope, but I do think fundamentally the downward pressure on the metagame, you have to be playing Wave or Sandman or you're going to lose to them. It just sort of is what it is. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Remember to like, subscribe, do the things that make my dopamine chemicals go burr. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.